Monster Hunter Wilds is the latest installment from Capcom and features the best combat in the series, a diverse roster of old and new monsters, and controllable RNG for crafting that perfect build. It's the new peak of the series, and potentially an early contender for Game of the Year. I sat down with our senior writer Austin Wood to get the lowdown on his review of the game, and why it's worth your money. So stick around if you want to find out more about Monster Hunter Wilds. Hi, Austin, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Good. So you have recently been playing Monster Hunter Wilds for us. Well, first things first, what do you think of it?
It's really good. I think it's my new favorite Monster Hunter, largely just for the game feel, how the weapons feel to control. Pretty much all my favorite weapons, especially Lance, and I played a lot of Greatsword in this playthrough for the review, are like the best they've ever felt in the series, and that's over a couple thousand hours over a couple of games.
Nice. So you've well, I mean, you're a big Monster Hunter fan, obviously. Would you say this is potentially the best Monster Hunter?
It's kind of hard to evaluate the whole series because this is kind of like the first half of the game as we're expecting the inevitable master rank expansion in like a year or so. So Monster Hunter World had Iceborne and Monster Hunter Rise had Sunbreak. So we're just expecting the same thing, but for a high rank launch lineup in terms of the monsters we have and how the weapons feel as a base for just the combat sandbox, I think it is the strongest they've ever had. The new monsters they've added with this game are really diverse, and there's a lot of weird stuff in here, things that if you saw them outside of a trailer or something, you might not even assume they were from a Monster Hunter game. And that combined with like the focus mode addition to how weapons can be aimed and controlled and the various attacks and counterattacks, it's really just the kind of game that I'll keep playing just for the moment to moment gameplay of just how satisfying it is to kind of pound on monsters.
They've sort of adjusted it a bit, haven't they? Because Monster Hunter was always like about fighting the monsters, but this one feels like there's a bit more story to it, potentially.
Kind of surprisingly so, 'cause I said in the review that the storytelling, the narrative of Monster Hunter games is usually just kind of an excuse to introduce new monsters and keep you kind of moving from place to place. And there's still a little bit of that. It's not, a story-driven game by any means, not even close. But the narrative that is here is much more forward and compelling and kind of just structured than stuff, even in like Monster Hunter World, which is sort of just researchers researching research for the sake of research. It just becomes this loop of contrivances and stuff. But there's a much kind of more thematical heart to Wilds. We have kind of core cast and a lot of really, really lovely cutscenes throughout the game. It feels structured, like with chapters and sort of bespoke missions. Again, not something like your kind of big, I guess, like story-driven RPGs, like no, Witcher or Baldur's Gate comparisons to be made here, but it is a surprisingly strong narrative for a Monster Hunter game, for sure.
With it being a bit more structured, do you sort of feel like this is a good starting point for new players coming into the franchise? Like, I have not played a Monster Hunter game before, but I get the feeling that this might be a bit more easy for people to step into the series with, get used to it. What do you think?
Yeah, it's kinda hard for me to evaluate because I can't just, like, forget all the Monster Hunter kinda experience that I have, but I do try to think about that with each new game because it feels like they get a little better, and I think this is probably the most approachable one they've done. The weapon moves are explained well, the sort of process of this is how you make your hunter stronger, and this is how you choose what monsters to hunt is pretty well explained. You have that nice, like, on-rail, like, on-ramp with the story missions of going from biome to biome and meeting these people and things kind of unfold pretty gradually. And it feels like the combat is just fast enough to help people kind of get into it because there was famously like the sort of pre-world era, especially Generations Ultimate less so, but like for Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate previously, there was very like back and forth combat, and that's sort of slowly gotten faster and faster. And this is, I think, you have so many reactive options that if you're accustomed to action games, I think it won't take as much getting used to. Monster Hunter still has a very deliberate pacing to it, and it can be very punishing if you just try to fly through it. But I think it should be like pretty comfy to pick up and play. And obviously, the review environment, my time with multiplayer was limited, but from what we've seen from the beta and stuff, the multiplayer setup of having like this sort of holistic lobby, and then you and your friends, or you or two other people, or whoever can split off to do quests of your own, sort of just posting them at any time on the board, as opposed to the old like just four people in a group thing. It should be, especially with cross-play, cross-platform launch, it should be much more of a like a social experience. I think should be easier to put groups together, which will help. Probably helps that it is high rank and it's not a terribly difficult game. I would say like I didn't have much trouble with like monsters feeling kind of sort of outscaling me. I generally didn't cart a lot. I didn't get knocked out a lot by monsters, and you have a lot of ways to kind of insulate yourself from the more like the potential difficulty spikes of sort of I'm trying to like avoid spoilers of certain matchups or skills or things like that, but it's not like a brutal game, I wouldn't say, and that helps with kind of people getting into it.
With your sort of overall experience of the game, encapsulating everything that you did, um, what would you say are the pros of this game?
The biggest one for me is just how the weapons feel, and it's just it's that back and forth of matchups with certain weapons against certain monsters and kind of feeling that out. Like there have been a couple times throughout the review grind where I've stopped and redone a few fights for upwards of an hour or so just to really feel out like how I want to hunt the specific thing and learning sort of the nuances of each monster's moveset and of each weapon's moveset and how these things interact. Like, okay, I really love using lance against this and this, but this is a monster where I can't imagine fighting with anything but great sword or anything other than hammer, which were the main three weapons I used. And there's so many other weapons I want to experiment with more. Like I love insect glaive historically. I'm excited to try sword and shield and hunting horn and multiplayer and stuff. And really just sort of mastering and savoring the combat sandbox, I think, is what really carries it. But they've also done some really smart stuff with sort of the other side of the core Monster Hunter loop, which is hunting monsters and crafting gear. The process of upgrading your hunter, because the big selling point of Monster Hunter has always been you like the sort of skill expression is how you get stronger. So you improve your hunter by hunting another monster, which gets you better gear, which you can now use to hunt this monster. And so you sort of see your this thing that was either really struggling with before, now you can kill it in a couple of minutes or even just a couple of minutes faster than before, and that sort of loop. So now that process of getting better gear, there's a couple different varieties of weapons. They've mentioned recently on one of the streams the Arshin weapons, which have a sort of a custom design to them. And so I know everyone remembers like the terrible decoration RNG in Monster Hunter World, which made it really hard to get the sort of dream build you wanted. And that has been toned down a lot. I had a really nice set of decorations pretty quickly. And investigations are back, which I think started in World, I don't remember, where you have a version of a quest to hunt a monster. They're sort of randomly generated. You snag them and you can make them semi-permanent where you can play them a couple times, and that like guarantees a certain type of loot you might need to finish your build off. And it makes it much easier and kind of more intuitive to say, okay, I want these pieces of gear to have these skills for this build so that I can hunt this specific thing. And that whole process, I wouldn't say it's been like oversimplified. It's just been streamlined to be much more intuitive. Like it makes more sense and it's more deterministic with less of the RNG of some previous games where if you didn't get this one drop or you didn't get this one charm, it was really hard to have your sort of dream build.
Hmm. And would you say sort of the monster roster is another really big pro to this game? I've seen quite a few of them and how they look, and they look absolutely just jaw-droppingly like designed. I can't even describe it. Some of them are just really, really cool to look at, and I assume they're quite cool to fight as well.
Yeah, kind of the frustrating thing is that some of the coolest monsters are the ones we can't really talk about because they're just sort of kind of keeping those hidden until the game is really and truly out.
Mhm.
But even the ones that they've shown in various trailers and stuff, like it's close to 3 dozen monsters we have right now, and there's already more they've announced. In the first spring update is going to add Izutsune, which is one of the big four from Generations Ultimate, one of my favorites. Very cool water dragon. But yeah, like for a high rank lineup is not just the quantity, but also the variety of monsters we have. Like they've shown off the big fire octopus, new Udra before release, and stuff with that kind of build of the sort of unorthodox. Because for so much of Monster Hunter is like wyverns, right? These sort of four-legged or six-limbed, uh, fanged beasts and flying wyverns and ground wyverns and stuff like that. And there are obviously some of those here, but there's a huge range of like almost just body types of how these things move and what type of creature they are, and learning to fight them in a way that's a lot less sort of linear than we might be used to of like I've killed, hundreds of Rathians by hitting their head with a hammer over the years, right? And that kind of experience is here, but there's a lot of just bizarre angles of attack almost that you have to kind of get used to with this game. And it makes for a really exciting, I keep coming back to like the combat sandbox of how you react to sort of what is thrown at you.
My personal favorite that I've seen is Lala Barina. They look so amazing.
Yeah, that is one of my favorites because they've also brought back Nursilla, which is one of the other spider-like monsters for this game, which we hadn't seen in a while. And I do love Lalabrina. I love the soundtrack for it, and it has this great sort of high strings song going with it, and it sort of you'll see overlaps with how it moves, where you can almost see it plucking the strings with its creepy little clicky legs, and that sort of embellishment is applied to every monster. Like everyone gets, these very like striking scores and memorable moments with like very flashy attacks. Lalabrina has that rose bloom on its abdomen, and that becomes the sort of paralysis attack at various points. It's all like really, really flavorful and adds a lot to the world and sort of how these creatures would fit into this ecosystem, and just makes for what is essentially in a lot of ways a boss rush type of game. It makes each boss really memorable.
With every game, there are positives and there are negatives. I know that you mentioned that you don't like sort of the UI and UX annoyances, and they kind of add up. Do you mind sort of elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's sort of a classical Monster Hunter type of problem where because it's the same sort of core gameplay loop of hunt a thing and craft a thing. It's that cycle. Any sort of problem within that cycle is going to come up a lot because you're going to go through that cycle many, many times. And stuff like that from wilds, it's just like these little tiny things here and there. Like some monsters run away a lot and run very far across the map. So that just kind of adds time somewhat arbitrarily to your hunt. The radial menu where you can pull up to like quickly sharpen your weapon or drink a potion or something. To me, sometimes took like a couple of inputs. It felt a little unresponsive sometimes. You have this really cool mountain elk, a little raptor-like bird called a sacred, which you can summon to carry you around the map, and it'll pick you up if you get like knocked out by a monster. Sometimes that one takes a couple extra seconds to come get you and stuff. The map is a little finicky where it'll tell you something cool has appeared on the map, and it's that little update obstructs you from actually opening the map. Um, just little things like that here and there, just kind of start to like grate on you a little bit. But outside of that, like I didn't have any technical issues playing on a base PS5. It looked just fine playing on performance mode. And again, the story was like collectively very good. There were just a few moments that seemed very silly. I think we might have even seen some of these in the preview build a couple months ago, where it's like this idea that your ability to wield weapons against monsters is somewhat almost comically played up, but sort of by the locals. But I think it all like the little things can't kind of distract from just how great the core is. And
Mhm.
that's really what I remember. And I'm hoping that we see some of those little things like the menu, like the sacred response time, or things like the map notifications. I'm hoping those can be kind of polished in post-launch updates because the little issues would be reasonably fixable, but the core, I think they've really nailed.
Nice. Do you mind touching a little bit on the secondary weapon slots, and sort of how you feel they're a bit underutilized as well?
Yeah, so that was one of the big things in the lead up to release. Is like in Monster Hunter World, we got the ability to sort of go to a little camp in the middle of a hunt and change our gear, which was pretty new. Now we can actually bring two weapons with us. You have a secondary weapon in a little pouch on your sacred. So you can just have your bird come over to you, hop on, change weapons, and hop off. And that process of like just in the middle of a fight, quickly mount and then dismount just to change weapons, I find a little awkward. But just bringing two weapons wasn't something I touched a lot. Sort of a creature of habit. It's new to Monster Hunter. I didn't really have it in my muscle memory, but I tend to just bring a weapon and a strategy to hunt this thing that I'm hunting, and I usually would just rather stick to it. Like I could see using the two weapon stuff for some interesting strategies with like status effects, and I think it'll have a lot more use in multiplayer potentially. Like if you pop a poison at the start of the hunt or paralysis, and then because monsters build up resistance to statuses, so they're better at the start of the fight. So you could burn through like easy paralysis or blast or like a free sleep at the start of the hunt and then swap off to something stronger for more just damage. I think that is interesting, but it can, especially playing solo, it can feel like a solution looking for a problem. And the two weapon system was one of the reasons they have changed how armor skills work in this game, with this hard divide between these skills go on your weapons because they're attack oriented or they're sort of unique, like guard on the lance or something like that, versus these skills are generalist and utility and defensive, and that's what's on your armor. And for the most part, and that system, like born of the other system, so it's like a system with two weapons I didn't use very much, sort of contributes to an armor and skills system that is very, I'm very neutral on. I'm not super excited or super disappointed with it, but those are kind of things that are just there. They don't bother me, but they don't really excite me right now either. Hopefully they can build on those with future updates. Hopefully it's one of those things where like I find myself very hungry for the master ranked version of this game, because what's here is just an incredible base of game feel and the monster lineup. But I'm kind of spoiled by the master rank experience coming from Monster Hunter Rise, especially, where we have just a much greater variety of skills and difficulty. So, but I think back to like the launch Monster Hunter World days of what high rank felt like then, and I do think this is a lot better in many many ways in terms of loot variety and end game variety, and what the Monster Hunter, what the monster lineup is.
So one thing that we want to kind of touch on, just to let people fully make their mind up about whether they want to get Monster Hunter Wilds or not. Do you think it is worth the time and money investment for people?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a 4.5 out of 5 for us for a reason. It's a really great game. I think it is going to be pretty accessible, especially if you have, friends on any platform now who play it. And I played it for about, I think the basic review completion of doing all the quests, beating all the monsters, crafting a solid end game set took me about 47 hours or so. I played a little more for just for footage capture and stuff and double checking things. But that was with a little bit of rushing. I did a little bit of my usual, like, I want to practice this matchup real quick and that extended my playtime a bit. But there's a lot to be had here for sure. I'm going to play a lot more once I can get it on PC for myself. That's sort of the big question mark for me, is I'll be looking today how the PC version ran, because I haven't had access to it yet. I played PS5, and assuming that's hopefully better than how Monster Hunter World launched, which is still a big question mark. Um, there's a lot of end game stuff to be had that I'm really excited to dig into, with no kind of review environment to worry about, of just, again, mastering all the weapons and trying different ones, having a couple different armor sets for specific matchups, and some sort of casual speed running. So I think for especially fun with friends, and the sort of more structured story experience, if you're coming from that type of sort of action RPG, I think there is definitely a lot like to be had up front. And then if you want to stick around for more, you want to be mastering different weapons or being ready for the new title updates, which are always fun to go through when they come out, for sort of more like long time hardcore players. I think both types of audiences will find something fun here. I really cannot stress enough, like, of all the Monster Hunter games I play, which I started with 4 Ultimate and I've played all the ones since then for, usually a couple hundred hours a piece. This is the best that the game has ever felt from a combat perspective. I think that some of the changes from Rise of, so we had that split of like Rise had the very over the top wire bug attacks, and World was a much more grounded approach. I think this is somewhere in the middle, leaning a bit toward World a bit, but it still has that flair, really powerful hits and really reactive abilities that I think is a really great balance of, people talked about, and I did as well, of like Wilds looked like Monster Hunter World 2, and there is a lot of that to it, but it has that almost anime extremist flair to it, of really really just satisfying attacks to land that keep me coming back, just hunt over hunt.
Well, I think I'm kind of sold on getting this game now as a newbie to the series. It sounds pretty amazing, actually. I mean, looking at the footage, looking at the way the combat is, it's definitely going on my list.
Hope you enjoy it for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Love talking about Monster Hunter.
Monster Hunter Wilds is available now on PS5, Xbox Series X, and PC. Will you be picking it up? What monster are you looking forward to fighting the most? Let us know in the comments and follow GamesRadar for the biggest game releases of 2025.